So you want me to tell you the story of my life?
Like I said, that's what I do. I interview people. I'm a collector of lives.
Welcome to Table Talk. I'm Heath, and I'll be your host. This is the show where I go one-on-one with a creator, author, illustrator, publisher, or other mover and shaker in the world of tabletop games, video games, TV, movies, or any other area of the geekverse.
You followed me here, didn't you?
Yeah, I suppose I did. You seem very interesting. This is where you live?
Yes, this is my home. Welcome.
So, what do you do?
I'm a vampire.
That's something I haven't heard before.
Guests have included individuals such as Lou Anders, the author of the Thrones and Bones fantasy novels, creator and publisher of the Norengard RPG, and even the author of Star Wars, A Pirate's Price.
Bond. James Bond.
Well, not James Bond. I haven't gotten to talk to him yet, but maybe sometime in the future. But how about Brian Colin, the creator of the vast, grim, dark horror RPG and sculptor of the world of Revelo monster busts? Mark Tassin, the creator of the world of Italtus, head of Mechanical Muse, and the head developer of the new Cool Name RPG. I've spoken with Jeff Engelstein, game designer and former commentator on the Dice Tower. He and I got deep into the statistics, probability, and psychological function of dice in tabletop games. Jamie Stegmaier, the founder of Stonemaier Games and crowdfunder extraordinaire. He's published many hit board games like Scythe and Wingspan. I've spoken with Sydney Engelstein from Indie Boards and Cards to talk about what it really takes to publish a board game in today's environment and what it would take for you to get published if you were trying to get a publisher for your board game. I've spoken with Ajit George about game writing, education, and his contribution to Van Richter's Guide to Ravenloft and his development of the Journey Through the Radiant Citadel Dungeons & Dragons book. Let's see, who else have I spoken to?
I am Hela, Odin's firstborn, commander of the legions of Asgard, the rightful heir to the throne, and the goddess of death.
Yes, I really appreciate her taking the time to speak with me. That was a great interview. I've also spoken with Cameron Pasha, a writer and novelist who's been working in Hollywood for over 20 years. His projects have included Emmy and Golden Globe nominated Sleeper Cell, Kings, Nikita, and Roswell, New Mexico. His analysis and commentary have been very popular on YouTube. I've gotten to speak with Paul Shadow, the former network executive who has made quite a splash here on YouTube with his reaction videos to current movies and films. He and I discussed the status of independent film and web productions online today. Brianna De Silva is a reoccurring guest on the show and a very popular one at that. She's an author and director, and she was also the co-writer of the cultist comedy web show that's here on the channel. She and I regularly meet to study and analyze stories. I've also gotten to speak with of the Positive Fandom channel. She's an ally in our effort to be a positive and constructive force in the geekverse. Are you ready? Have you got your drink? Are you all settled in? You might want to buckle up because it could be a wild ride. We're about to explore the worlds of tabletop gaming, sci-fi, fantasy, and the geekverse through the eyes of those who are making things happen.
Atomic batteries to power. Turbines to speed.
Roger. Ready to move out.
It's time for Table Talk. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being so patient. I just had some major technical difficulties just as we were about ready to go, my camera froze and then my whole computer crashed. I was over here on an auxiliary laptop, but then during the intro, I think I got it up running on my main computer again, so we'll see. If I go down again, I will try to get the auxiliary laptop or the auxiliary iPad back up and running. But thank you so much for being here. We have Doug Burton back with us tonight. I'm wrong-footed because of all of that now. Doug is back with us tonight. He is obviously an extremely popular guest on this channel, and he is the creator of the particular theory of story that we've been looking at a lot on this channel. So if you haven't seen others of Doug's live streams, you should definitely check these out. It's called the Heroine's Labyrinth, and it is the feminine alternative to the hero's journey, and that has been very well articulated. I know that people have questions for him as we go here. More questions for him I saw on the Discord server. He asked me if we could do a deep dive on one movie and analyze it in the context of the Heroine's Labyrinth. So I said, absolutely, sure we can. So he recommended doing Silence of the Lambs. So we're going to do a deep dive into Silence of the Lambs as in the context of the Heroine's Labyrinth. I watched it for the first time actually several months ago. It's been a few months, but it's relatively new to me. But then I watched it again this afternoon in preparation for this this live stream, so it'll be fresh on my mind. So everybody, please welcome Doug. Hi, Doug.
Hi, everybody. How are you?
I'm so sorry for the trouble and getting started late. So, but thank you everybody for hanging out with me. All right. So I was trying to bring up before we actually got started because I wanted to post your book on Amazon. This is Faraway Bird.
Yes.
And
that's right. That's where we went wrong, isn't it?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was trying to look up. I was like, I want to have that ready. So I didn't even get that ready. So your book is The Heroine's Labyrinth, but that's not published or ready yet.
I just got my final line edits back from my editor yesterday morning. So I went back and made, it's very exhausting, but a lot of the technical edits, like if a comma or a period is in italics, you got to switch that back, like all these little things. But I got that done. So the manuscript is essentially in its final form. I might make a few adjustments there, but hopefully this book will come out either hopefully later this year. That's my goal.
Okay. And this is the book that inspired it. Actually, I think what I found was just right now the audiobook. So you also have an audiobook?
Yeah, it's on audible.com. Like, I'm a huge fan of audiobooks, and a friend of mine even wrote some original music for it. So the audiobook's pretty cool. It's on Audible if you're into audiobooks, obviously paperback or ebook form as well. But The Heroine's Labyrinth came about from writing this book. I know I've mentioned this before, but just in case anyone is wondering what the connection is, while writing this book, I was using the hero's journey, which most of us here know and love and have studied in depth. And the hero's journey did not quite work for me with this person who's a real historical figure. And when I went to go research a feminine alternative to the hero's journey, I was a little frustrated and I guess somewhat disappointed in what I found. I did not find something that did what the hero's journey did. And so I decided I would take the time and write a nonfiction book, which is not what I ever wanted to do. But I wrote it all out. I laid out all the ideas, and I've had a lot of conversations and feedback and help from several people to help me kind of put this all together. And we're at the finish line with it. So I can't wait to get it out there. And in the meantime, Heath has been awesome for providing a place to discuss this and field questions, talk about it, and look at it from different angles. So this has been a great experience for me personally, and hopefully for everyone listening as well, especially if you're a writer, because you can use these things. The Heroine's Labyrinth helped me immediately with writing my book and coming up with approaches to my novel.
All right. And okay, so fantastic. So that is where that stands. So that's available now, not only as an audiobook, but also as an audiobook.
It says the audiobook is $0.
Well, I think it says free with my Audible trial.
So okay. I was going to say, I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah. So it's not just, it's got 188 ratings. Oh, so lots of people have seen this, but yeah. So if you get a free Audible trial, it does say that you can get it free with an Audible trial.
There you go.
I have been working. I also like trying to get something out myself. If you've been following the morning grind, I have the proof of Goodnight Sword. This is my medieval children's takeoff, obviously, of Goodnight Moon. So this is what I've been working on, and I've been trying to come up with different ways. So we're working on print on demand. This is the final proof here. So I was actually working on getting the Kickstarter page up. And, I was working on that and I wasn't able to save it. It was like, no, you got to go and do something else. And now my whole computer crashed. So I bet I lost that work. So I've been trying to work on the Kickstarter page so we can do a Kickstarter page for anybody who would like to get a Goodnight Sword.
That's
awesome. That's mine. And that's coming soon.
You have to be careful sleeping with swords.
Yes, it does. Brianna laid it out. So Brianna was the layout artist, and then you can also watch we have the lightly animated audiobook of it available on YouTube. She laid out the physical book. She was responsible for most or all of the animation. Oh, and wow. Then also she read it on on the channel. So,
Oh, I
she
didn't know
was-
Brianna also did art.
Well, no, she didn't do the art. She
did the
did
animation.
she got the art. That was Adam M. Botsford. Adam M. Botsford is the artist, but then Brianna got the imagery from him, all the illustrations on all the different layers, and actually animated the art.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
And then also, I will say, one of my shows, another one of my shows, is returning to YouTube on Friday. Dinner and a Board Game. This is the first. I'm doing a third pilot of Dinner and a Board Game. I'm going to be doing a solo quest. Friday, 6:30 p.m. Hero Quest, Frozen Horror. I'm going to be cooking bacon fried steak and then be playing a solo Hero Quest game. So that's 6:30.
You can't go wrong
Friday
with bacon fried steak.
Yes. Oh, Brand says all of the animation. Yeah, I thought it was all of the animation because I don't think that I did any of it. So I was like, did I do? I don't think I did. I think that was all. I think that was all her. So she's the one who prepared all of the animation. Okay, so that's what we're doing. And also, by the way, I guess one final thing is that people had asked me about getting channel memberships gifted, the gifted channel memberships, and we finally tracked all of that down. So we finally tracked all of that down. So if you would like to gift memberships, you can gift memberships to people, and we'll be taking a look at the comments from channel members. We'll be taking super chats, or if you are a channel member, then we can take a look at comments and questions and things like that. But you can get a channel membership, or you can gift channel memberships. That is actually available for sure now.
Awesome.
All right, Doug, where do you want to start with this movie and its analysis?
Probably why I suggested it. We had, you allowed me to kind of explain what the Heroine's Labyrinth was. So we went through all of the archetypal events or moments, and I kind of tried to explain it in abstraction and then give some examples. And then we also discussed, Brianna came on and she had some questions, and we wrestled with some of the ideas and discussed some of the ideas, some of it in abstraction, and again, some examples. So I thought maybe it would be good or useful or helpful to have one movie that we go through and look at through the lens of the Heroine's Labyrinth as kind of a universal reference. And Silence of the Lambs, I thought, was good because I think most people have seen it. I believe that anyway. And if you haven't, you should. It's a great movie. It was a Best Picture winner. Jodie Foster won Best Actress. Anthony Hopkins won Best Actor. Like, the movie was phenomenally done. So it was a good one to explore kind of how these themes fit into a movie, and also, or a story, and how, if you're interested in this kind of thing, how to watch a movie and how to sort of pull out those archetypes or detect a pattern when doing some research or studies of your own. Because quite honestly, it's fun. I like it. And from when I listen to Brianna and Heath talk, it sounds like it's very fun for them too. And even judging from some of the comments, it looks like there's an interest in this, and it's fun to find patterns in storytelling. So that's why we're doing this. And again, I picked Silence of the Lambs because I thought it was pretty universal, and most people have seen it. And it's one of the stories that hits almost every single trope in the Heroine's Labyrinth. So, like anyone who's studied the hero's journey, you know that when you try to apply it perfectly, sometimes a step is missing, or an archetypal event is missing, or there's a little bit of a stretch. So, movies, stories, novels fit into a pattern to varying degrees, and the Heroine's Labyrinth fits with Silence of the Lambs very well.
Okay, so should we? I've got some notes because I've got the notes that you sent me in, like the table of contents and things like that. I can bring that up. I would have been ready, but I had the technical problems. I'm still trying to put everything together.
No, I hear you.
So is it best to like bring that up and then go, because that your chapter sequence is is in order. So is it better to go that way and then say, now here's this part of the Heroine's Labyrinth, and then here is what is going on in the movie? Or should we talk about the movie and then like go chronologically through the movie and then pair it to that? Which way is best to go?
I think it would be, do you have that thing that I sent you? It had the summary. where it had like each, like the broken spell, and it had like a little criteria below it, that like answer key. Do you have that still?
I'm sure I do, because we didn't look at that last time.
No, I sent it, but we didn't use
you
it.
Sent
I
it, but we didn't look at it.
Yeah, I think that's a good one, because as a kind of as something to help writers, I did what I like, which is something concise. It's good to have deep, meaty discussions about it, especially in a book, but it's also nice to have a quick, easy reference that I can go through. So if I'm writing, I can look at the quick reference and kind of, it triggers the thoughts of all the deeper conversation. So I tried to come up with a small list or small criteria for each archetypal theme, so that you could see kind of what about it define the theme, to help kind of steer or orient that understanding of it.
Okay, I do have it right here.
So that's the
I was
list.
able to find that. So this is the notes you sent last time.
Do you scroll down a little bit? I just want to make sure. Okay, yeah, that's it. So each of those bullet points is a summary point, a kind of a criteria for a quick reference, and this might be useful while we explore this movie.
Okay.
So you can see to what extent this particular story conforms to these ideas or has these themes or elements in them. Because every movie is a little bit. Every movie, every novel is a little different, and has the archetypal theme in a variant. Even though the core element should be mostly present, or one or two key ones specifically present.
Okay. Well, then do we want to start here with chapter 1?
Yeah, and I just saw what Sable Phoenix said. I read The Hero with 1,000 Faces, and there's a pretty famous quote that Joseph Campbell has, and it was a university professor who is a woman named oh my God, I'm drawing a blank. Maureen Murdoch. She asked him about the feminine side of the hero's journey, and his answer was something along the lines of, "Don't worry, ladies. You're the prize to be won. The hero's job is to make his way to you and to rescue you, basically." And obviously, that didn't sit well with many feminists or professors or women in general. It didn't sound like there was much room for them in the hero's journey. So that answer has become something that people have zeroed in at as a major flaw in the hero's journey. I think it makes more sense than people give it credit for, under the rubric of a warrior-oriented trope, that there is a sensible reason for what he said, but it still doesn't solve the problem, in my view, of what about women? What about women? And obviously, it's pretty reductive to say, hang tight, a hero is on his way to rescue you. That certainly doesn't sit well with a lot of people. So what Sable Phoenix is saying, that is one of what is considered to be a flaw in the hero's journey, that it doesn't address these. So hopefully the Heroine's Labyrinth definitely really does address something that women will identify with, and men too. These are universal. Some things I think are dynamically feminine or masculine. And I think Heath, you and Brianna have talked about that. And I think she had a list that kind of tried to define some of those qualities. And that's awesome. But I do believe the hero's journey is universal, meaning women can fulfill the warrior's role or go on the hero's journey, just like I think a man can find himself caught in the labyrinth. Mm-hmm. And I love that.
Yes. So you already have a sale from Sable Phoenix right here. So that quote was Murdoch. So you can ask difficult questions. We will get to it. I know there were a lot of comments because I was gone, so I may not be able to go back. But we'll just start here. So yeah, if there are questions, you can put them in, James. I mean, I guess that was to you though. You okay with a difficult question?
Yeah, I mean, Brianna was talking to me last time, and she let me know she had some questions, and some of them might be more difficult than others. And I'll just answer the best of my ability. And if I don't know, or if you bring up something I've never considered, I'll just say I don't know. And sometimes asking tough questions is how I get to the bottom of bigger idea. So the book, The Heroine's Labyrinth, I didn't just scribble away in some tower somewhere. It was through a lot of questions like the ones you might be asking tonight to help me kind of hone in and zero in on the ideas or to fully articulate them. So ask away. And if I know it, I'll answer. Or if I've thought about it and have an answer, I will. And if I don't, I'll just say, I don't know yet.
Well, okay, okay, we're going to get into going scene by scene of the movie in just a second, but let's go ahead and start with James's question, because it's actually something, it relates to something I was about to bring up then. So James, the question is, if the Silence of the Lambs has already famously and exhaustively been broken down into the different beats of the hero's journey, and the Labyrinth maps directly onto that, is the Labyrinth not just a flavor of the hero's journey like Harmon's embryonic story cycle or Murdoch's heroine's journey?
I don't think so. However, and Brianna had a lot of questions to this point as well. Like, is this ultimately just another manifestation of the hero's journey? Some people, maybe they think it is. The reason I don't think it is because it's so distinctive in terms of certain tropes that, and we could see even with Silence of the Lambs, what I'm talking about. And all I would say is this: we've only had the hero's journey as a model to use. So every story, and myself included, including Silence of the Lambs and other movies and novels, I've only been able to use, notes from the hero's journey and be like, okay, where's the call to adventure? Okay, where's the mentor figure? So I've only been able to analyze through those lenses. And by doing so, I will find, in some cases, something that closely matches the Wise Guide or the Belly of the Beast moment. And I'll write those down. So I believe that most of us have been using the hero's journey to graft onto other stories. In some cases in perfect fits, meaning it's a hero's journey story unambiguously. Other times it's a little bit more of a stretch. All I'll say is, after the Heroine's Labyrinth is out and available, or even here, this is really the one place that we're exploring this in any kind of depth. It's not out there yet. So our group is having this discussion here on Heath's channel, and we are looking at this. I guess y'all are looking at this with fresh eyes, which is awesome. All I would say is, by the end of it, if a story matches up more with the Heroine's Labyrinth, it may give you a new way to think about it, meaning it's more like the Heroine's Labyrinth and much less like the hero's journey. If that's the case, then it's more of a Heroine's Labyrinth story. And the tropes don't fit as nicely from the hero's journey onto it. And I would say, under the structure of the Heroine's Labyrinth, that Silence of the Lambs is, in my opinion, decisively more of a Heroine's Labyrinth story. And of course, like I told Brianna, that doesn't mean that nothing of the hero's journey applies. Several stories have some of both, and some stories have a lot of the hero's journey. It's a hero's journey story. And other stories, like I believe Silence of the Lambs, has a lot of the Heroine's Labyrinth, meaning it's a Heroine's Labyrinth story. But at the end of the day, I'm not here to say I'm right about every little thing or that my opinion is the only one that matters. Trust your instincts. Like, your ability to analyze a story is going to serve you very well, especially if you're a writer. I'm here mainly to present an alternative way to look and study a story structure and how it's put together. And like I said, I think at the end of it, if it seems to fit very well with the Heroine's Labyrinth, more so than the hero's journey, then I would say it's a Heroine's Labyrinth story under that context or that framework.
I've thought, not extensively, because I haven't had time to sit and think extensively over the past week, but I have thought in some moments, kind of going off what James was talking about, that we did discuss the yin and the yang last week.
I love that.
And
that's a new thought to me.
Yeah. So in the time that I have had time to consider this since the last discussion, that has stuck out to me. It's not the way that I was organizing things when I was thinking, now, what are our story structures and our archetypes? but it would be, because I was thinking like maybe like I had hypothesized that maybe there's 6 or 8 of these things. And so that maybe the heroine's journey is different, but it would be interesting. It would be interesting if we had this concept of hero, and then the hero was a yin and yang kind of mixture of these two masculine and feminine roles. Because we did say there was some of each, in each. So if you say, well, now here's this aspect of this, and here's well, that's part of the yin and the yang, that you end up with some of the other in one or the
I
other.
think that is a very reasonable way to approach it, and it's something new to consider. I'll say that for sure. It's definitely something new to consider, and on first pass, it makes a lot of sense to me to look at it like that. There were some stories that I thought of more as a hero's journey story until the Heroine's Labyrinth. Now I look at it, I'm like, oh, that's a Heroine's Labyrinth story.
Yeah.
More so than a hero's journey story. But I thought it was a hero's journey story, and I grafted onto it with the hero's journey because that's all I have. That's the only way I was able to study that story in the past.
So that's possible. I'm thinking, if I think about it more, I might think about then this concept of hero, archetype of hero, but then having the sub concepts of Heroine's Labyrinth and Hero's Journey.
Right. So my book followed a little bit of both, because I tried intentionally to graft her I shouldn't say graft, to find the parts of her biographical details that matched up with the hero's journey. The problem was there was a vast section of her life that did not match up. And I was like, well, what do writers have to address all of this? And that's where the Heroine's Labyrinth, again, this isn't my invention. These are patterns and structures that I found in existing stories, the same way you could find the hero's journey pre-existing in these other stories. So mine has a little bit, so that yin and the yang would be there. Like, it was a big deal to me to have a mentor character like the hero's journey. So my story has a mentor figure. She's teaching her, the art of espionage and seduction, and what it means to be a spy to a high level individual, and how it's not small potatoes. You're stringing this person along for years. So it's a certain skill set. So I had her teach Theodora that, and that was fun, but that came from the hero's journey. It wasn't a Heroine's Labyrinth trope. And this is why my book focuses on tarot, or uses tarot cards, because the archetypal power of an event, like let's say you draw a card, it's the wise guide. Well, even though that comes from the hero's journey, maybe this is the card to play for your story. So again, I think it's good to look at it from an overarching structure. The more a story matches one structure over the other, the more I think that is the structure for that story. If a story like Moana has a little bit of both, there's definitely some hero's journey stuff in there. There's no question. And there's definitely some Heroine's Labyrinth themes and structures in there as well. So that's an example of a storyteller pulling from both. And I think good storytellers should do that. But also, I think it's good for a storyteller to identify which structure would make more sense to your particular story. And I think the Heroine's Labyrinth offers an alternative structure for stories. I think I mentioned even a memoirist. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to memoirists, and they're like, Hero's Journey does nothing for my memoir. However, the Heroine's Labyrinth might fit perfectly.
But let me ask this, because that confuses me.
Okay.
Because we're going to get to the Silence of the Lambs in just 1 second. But
sure.
That confuses me when you said that. Well, I don't think if I were writing a memoir that I would expect it to conform to a story structure.
Well, it has to conform to structure on some level. You have to have a you have to have a beginning, middle, and end. Otherwise, your story is meandering, it's aimless, and it doesn't have a beginning or an end. So even the memoirist is stuck taking this vast literature of their life, right? All these events, and they have to tell it in a story form. They have to tell it in a way that makes sense. Now, memoirs can be written a lot of different ways, but sometimes a memoirist tries to have an arc. This is where I started. This is where I ended. And when they try to structure the details of their story, what do I include? Should I mention that I did this in 8th grade? No, like that's not going to be part of the story. Why? Because that's not part of this arc. So if I'm trying to tell a certain story, like if you're asking me how I got to the Heroine's Labyrinth, and I'm like, well, it started with me trying to write Theodora. Even though these are real biographical details in my life, I have to pick the details that matter, and I have to find out where I'm going to start that story and where I'm going to end it. So you still have to have a story-like structure. And now advanced writers can maybe move away from that. But I think in general terms, there's still a beginning, middle, and end structure that will really help a memoirist tell their story. And by doing that, they have to figure out what story they're trying to tell and what details to include and what not to. So, and I've read in several articles and I've heard in discussions like this, people who are trying to write a memoir who have expressed like strongly that the hero's journey did not help them structure their story. So, and I understand I had trouble trying to adapt it to historical fiction, which needed a beginning, middle, and end. So it's about the character. Remember, all stories this is my view. I place the character as the number one most important thing. And what happens to that character is of supreme importance. And finally, after what happens to the character, what is the final result of all that? That's a story. That's what that is. So it still needs to follow some kind of a structure. And in order to do that, you have to know what to include in that story. So you still need some kind of a structure. You may not have a perfect villain. Like the Hero's Labyrinth, one thing it does well is you don't have to have a masked minotaur. Some stories have just the heroine and her native at odds with her native culture. But several, especially more recent ones, do include a villain character. A lot of stories do anyway. So, and a lot of us can think of many villains in our personal lives. There's different ones,
Okay, well then let's go to the. I see your question, James, here about the Masked Minotaur, but let's answer that question when we get to it in the Silence of the Lambs. Then, Zero Theory. Oh, so Zero Theory is also actually so actually we confirmed that James gave a gift of a membership, and Zero Theory got it. So thank you, James.
Oh,
so yes,
awesome.
Welcome. If I'm hearing beginning, middle, and end, I think there's a classic building to a climax. If there isn't a climax, there probably isn't a strong story.
That's mostly true. I mean, you might have someone come in and debate stories where there isn't a climax, and make the case that it's still a great story. And those stories will exist. However, a climax is a moment where competing ideas in the story that are relevant to the character, to the lead character, or the competing storylines of multiple characters. At some point, it should come to a head. There is usually a point where all the different versions of ethics, of power, can't coexist at once, and something's got to give. And climaxes, we have a word for it for a reason. They happen all the time in stories. Stories come to a head where a character has to make a critical decision that would vastly change the outcome of the story. If Luke gave up and didn't fight Vader, well, that's probably not a story worth telling. It's about a guy who was thinking about it and then changed his mind. To me, that's not much of a story. The reason the story exists is because this character went all the way. They followed through with it, and we want to know what happened when that character went all the way. And at some point, that character is probably going to reach a climax where something happens or it doesn't, and it would vastly affect the outcome. So, and I actually make the case in the Heroine's Labyrinth that climaxes do not have to be showdowns. Which I believe comes from a warrior-oriented trope, the idea of single combat, which we see all the time, and we love it. We love it. It's a very clear moment for climax. But in the Heroine's Labyrinth, the climax tends to be based more on the unmasking of the Minotaur. So it's a different form of a climax structurally.
All right. So let's I'll bring this back up. So here we go. So you want to tackle Silence of the Lambs?
Yeah. So Silence of the Lambs is a story that does tell some of these out of order. Okay. And, but a lot of these tropes are in the story in one variation or another, all the way down. It doesn't really skip too many. It doesn't really skip many things. And the Black Swan, keep in mind, I put that in the first part because then every Act 1 had 6, Act 2 had 6, Act 3 had 6. So it was the perfect spot to put it. But Black Swans can occur randomly in heroine-centric stories. So the first thing, the Labyrinth, I would say that Silence of the Lambs, if you watch the movie, is absolutely loaded with labyrinthine imagery. You see it almost everywhere. I think the movie opens with her on an obstacle course. She's running through trails, and there's literally like challenges on the trails. To me, that's Labyrinth-like, even though it's outdoors. But for the rest of the story, you'll find extreme Labyrinth-like imagery, stairwells, confined areas. Even I remember the first time I saw this years ago, the movie, when she goes into Buffalo Bill's basement, it didn't look like a basement. It looked like a maze. And I remember being amazed. I was like, who has a basement like this? It was so Labyrinth-like. It's so unlike my image of what a basement was. Her moving through that was absolutely a labyrinth. But we also, when she goes into the asylum, she goes down that very narrow, confined corridor where Hannibal's waiting at the end.
Yes.
Yeah. So there's just the imagery in there is pretty consistent. Even the way the filmmakers made the film. So people who are like Brianna, I think is a film buff, like she's making films. Even the style that this was filmed, the up closeness footage, like when two people are talking, the filmmaker puts the camera right on one face and then switches right to the other face. It's all up close. And a lot of the rooms and stuff were filmed down long hallways. It gives the sense of confinement. Yes, that was on accident. I was amazed at the maze. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. In terms of filmmaking, I thought it was filmed intentionally claustrophobic and to be maze-like.
Yeah, when you were talking about this, I thought that was the first thing you were going to say was when she goes to see the cell, because the cell, and I think I just saw a comment go by about, Hannibal was in the cell, but it's very dungeon-like. It's not exactly maze-like, exactly, but still very dungeon-like, like dungeon wall type stuff, which then is seen very similarly again in that basement.
I believe that dungeons are maze-like. Even in RPGs, you have something called a dungeon crawl, and it's like exploring a maze. You're going this way, you open this door, or you open that door. There's trap doors, there's hidden doors. It's like a dungeon crawl to me is like exploring a maze. And again, it's this idea that there are these narrow passageways. It's confining. It's dark. A lot of these places were indoors rather than outdoors. And to me, I think it was intentionally done that way to make it look labyrinthine in its and her navigation of the world she's occupying. Yeah, stairwells. Even the way it's filmed, everything just looks a little off and a little confusing or ominous, like you said, dark and dungeon-like. To me, that is by intent. Yeah, even that asylum, that wasn't my first image of what an asylum might look like. I pictured something a little bit more sterilized, maybe white walls, maybe something like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. To me, that's a place where you might find mental patients, but clearly they chose something that looked unlike that, and a long, narrow corridor, and of course, he's at the very end of it.
That had to be deliberate, right? Because it's not the white wall sterile medicalized place. It's my first thought was dungeon-like, very different. Like what exactly are they doing with, like, why does the FBI have that place?
I mean, is this the best place they could find? But definitely at the end as well, when she is going into his basement, clearly it takes on, like, once she goes down those stairs, you're in a whole nother world, and it's very scary. I mean, the first time you watch it, you really don't know. There's doors all over the place. You're like, is he going to pop out of one of these doors? And actually watching it last night, I noticed when she goes down the stairs, the basement stairs are full stairs. A lot of basement stairs have that missing part so someone could hide under them and grab your ankle. I was like, man, good thing they didn't use those floating stairs, because how would you ever even want to walk down those stairs if you could be under them? But they were closed off, and I was like, maybe they did that on purpose just to get her to go down them.
Maybe. I didn't see that. Okay, so the Masked Minotaur.
This one's easy. I would say in this case, he's a hidden Minotaur. Now, the first time we see him, I would say he does have a mask. He wears those night vision goggles. In fact, he is introduced in the film with the night vision goggles. he is stalking his prey, which is Catherine Martin. We see him first in those goggles, or the night vision goggles. And to me, seeing at night is an animalistic trait. Not, vision at night is for nocturnal animals, predators and prey alike. And also when Clarice is in the maze, in the basement, which is also dungeon-like, in my opinion, in the basement of Buffalo Bill, once again, those night goggles, he uses that. So to me, there is a mask that he wears. It does seem to give him that animalistic ability to see at night or to see in the darkness. But he is also hidden, and in the tradition of most crime dramas, which I mentioned before, does fit the Heroine's Labyrinth model. The Minotaur is hidden, and the heroine must find that Minotaur, of course, before they, kill again or commit another crime. So he's an easy one. And his name, Buffalo Bill, has an animal's name in it. Buffalo. I think we were talking about Labyrinth. One of the criteria, I think, I might have changed it, is an animal totem. Like in the David Bowie film Labyrinth, the owl. He was also an owl. He could turn into an owl. So there's always this animal-like totem, and his name has an animal. It's half animal, half man. Buffalo is an animal. Bill is a man's name. So I think he does have several archetypal facets that feed into that archetype of the masked Minotaur. And he is disguised. When she meets him at the end, he's like, "Hey, how you doing?" He's at the door. He's the friendly neighbor. He's out in the open. He's disguised. So she doesn't unmask him until later, but looking like a regular person is his disguise.
Okay, so since we're talking about the masked Minotaur, James asks, why is the masked Minotaur specifically named as a villain or anti-villain archetype? Doesn't limiting this type of villain in the story limit the potential for the story itself?
I don't think so, because if the masked Minotaur, I think it's a villain because the Minotaur as an actual creature, the actual source of the term Minotaur, is a cursed being. He had a mother who was a queen and a father who was a bull, and it was a cursed fornication, and the offspring was the Minotaur, the bull of Minos, and he's a cursed creature, having both man-like qualities in the torso and arms and neck, and then animal-like features in the head of the bull with the horns and the feet. So this type of archetype is very useful and very recurrent. So it would only limit you, in my opinion, if you were trying to fit your villain into this archetype, and this is not the archetype that's best suited for your story. So I'm certainly not saying you have to use this archetype, but this archetype as a villain is very successful because they are able to be disguised in society. They're not the dragon that you go off to slay. So if you're going to have a villain in the native culture, it should be someone who can pass and be socially acceptable in disguise while hiding the tyrant animal savagery of its cursed and evil self. And Buffalo Bill is that. He has a hidden tyrant in the native culture of the heroine.
Okay, and that's because we have to remember that when we're talking about the masked Minotaur and Beauty and the Beast, we're talking about Gaston.
In Beauty and the Beast, it is Gaston. He is secretly tyrannical.
We're not talking about the Beast. We're talking about Gaston.
Gaston meets the criteria for the masked Minotaur.
Right.
He is a social apex character who is disguised and beloved. All the girls are like swooning for him when he passes. All the guys want to be like him. I think they even have it in the lyrics. Everyone wants to be like you, Gaston. Everyone loves him. He's beloved. He's a great hunter and all this. But at the end, he's willing to murder Belle and the Beast. I mean, he's a murderous man. Once he is unmasked, he's capable of terrible evils. And we don't see that until Belle unmasks him. So that's the side of him that was hidden.
Now, when I naively think about Silence of the Lambs, and you ask think about mask, I mean, you do think about Hannibal, like
yes,
because you said, okay, the mask, this is easy, we got the goggles, but Hannibal, is the one who is masked in several scenes. Well,
so Hannibal, I think that's a great point. Hannibal meets the criteria for the Beast as ally in this because he is helping Clarice and in a sense adopts her cause because there's several parts of the story show that he is helping Clarice catch Buffalo Bill and not the FBI. Two, remember what I said about the doppelganger effect between Beast as ally and the Masked Minotaur? Silence of the Lambs is picture perfect for the doppelganger effect. The Beast as ally tends to be a mirror-like image or a doppelganger of the Masked Minotaur. So to your point, he also wears a mask. He's also a serial killer. He's also super dangerous. He's also a man. So the Beast as ally shares a lot in common with the Masked Minotaur, as is typical in heroine-centric stories. So the fact that he has to wear a mask, especially, and it's not just any mask, it's a protective mask, not for him, but for others. He'll eat people. Talk about a big bad wolf. He actually eats heroine, or eats people. That's very Little Red Riding Hood like in that he eats people. And Buffalo Bill, he wears the skin of women. It's like a wolf in sheep's clothing. Wearing the skin of another individual is another almost fable or fairy tale like trope. So it's very interesting that these two villains who are so iconic and memorable have these like almost fairy tale folklore traits, eating people like the big bad wolf or being disguised in someone else's skins. Very unusual things to have in what would be a otherwise grounded story. It's not a fantasy story. It seems to take place in what it passes for the real world. Baltimore, East Coast, Midwest, I think it's kind of is that region. So Hannibal Lecter is on one side of the heroine, you have the Masked Minotaur, and on the other side, you have the Beast as ally. And that framework tends to be very recurrent. So we are jumping out of order, but that was a perfect time to discuss that because Hannibal will have many traits that as the Beast, as ally character, that the Masked Minotaur has. And going back to Beauty and the Beast, remember, Beast was originally going to lock Belle away and possess her the same way Gaston intended to. He was very beastly in the beginning, and Gaston ended up showing that he was beastly in the end. One of the defining traits that separates the two is one, the Beast the Beast as ally tends to adopt the heroine's cause, which I believe Hannibal does. And two, that he honors the heroine's sacred fire, which Hannibal absolutely does in some pretty unforgettable dialogue. Buffalo Bill does not. And we'll get into the sacred fire in a second. Buffalo Bill murders women. He does not respect their sacred fire or their humanity. He operates purely from an egoistic base, and his animal side is the dominant side.
Okay, well, then let's go to, I'll bring this back up, then the sacred fire.
Yes, so the sacred fire is one of the most compelling, in my opinion, one of the most interesting facets, and it can also be the most complex because it's very dynamic. It has many different features to it. So if you pull up the summary or the criteria, you'll get some idea of what the sacred fire is.
Okay, so I need to go down.
Right. And I always tell people it's a good idea to imagine a heroine as carrying a sacred flame that others are attracted to for various reasons. It doesn't have to be, it can be sexual attraction or just beauty, but it doesn't have to be. It could be other things. There are several examples, and the Silence of the Lambs is one of the stories where the sacred fire is not actually the heroine's sexuality at all, although people are still attracted to her for this quality. From what I could tell. There's three claims made to the sacred fire. The heroine makes her claim on the basis of her individuation, her goals, her free will, what she wants. This is what the heroine wants. The native culture makes a claim, usually based on the idea of continuity, and then the Minotaur makes a claim as well. Now, in this structure, so I'll first tell you what I think the heroine's sacred fire is when I think about it structurally.
Okay.
My answer is the feminine desire to help her protect. The feminine desire to help her protect. And I'm very specific in my wording of that. Clarice Starling is unequivocally motivated by the desire to help and protect. Okay. And I think it is expressed in her character as a heroine in a feminine way. So this might be something Brianna and you, Heath, might have some good thoughts on because you have analyzed specific traits of both masculine and feminine. And I believe hers is specifically feminine for several reasons. First off, her sacred fire is her. So that's why she joins the FBI. That's why she's there. And the first time she meets Hannibal Lecter, he tears her apart. And he's like, you could only dream about becoming more, getting away, going all the way to the FBI. And he kind of zeroes in on this motivating force in her life. And he is correct. So that's one dimension to look at. She's following her feminine desire to help and protect by joining the FBI. That is her sacred, that is her being her. That is her individuation. She chose this on her own. No one forced her to join the FBI. The native cultures claim is interesting because it's usually focused on continuity. And I would say there's a major stand-in for the native culture as the culture of the FBI itself. Okay. But I want to point out, so it says order, family, heritage, tradition. What was Clarice Starling's father? Do you remember?
Was he the farmer?
No, but he was in a rural small town in West Virginia.
Rural, small, yeah.
He was a police officer. So
that's right. That's right. Because he'd been shot.
He was shot.
Yeah.
I think she said he was shot off duty because he surprised a burglar and he was killed in the line of duty when she was a little girl.
That's right.
So there is a sense of continuity here. Very clear. She is following in her father's footsteps. And we can get to this later, but even at the end of the movie, Jack Crawford says, your father would be very proud of you at the end of the movie. So there's certainly that to provide a sense of continuity, as though it were a birthright. She is continuing this idea of serving and protecting as a law enforcement agent, like her father. So there's certainly that continuity. But in the story, the native culture doesn't really fight her much on this. Her dad dies, okay? So the native culture, as expressed in the story to me, is the culture, the institutional culture of the FBI. And in my opinion, they definitely have a claim on Clarice's sacred fire because they are the ones who are going to bring her in and employ her as an FBI agent. So their claim to her is professional. It's a professional claim to her sacred fire. And her sacred fire is the feminine desire to protect and help, or to help and protect. And the native culture, the FBI's claim to her is for the exact same thing. That's their claim to her sacred fire. So your feminine desire to help and protect is great, but you're going to do it in the FBI way.
Right.
You're going to follow our rules.
Also big on conformity. Yeah.
Big time. And there's rules to this. There's politics to this. Her native culture uses her, or the FBI uses her several times in the story. So the FBI claims her and uses her to their own ends, for their reasons, for their motivations. And sometimes it conflicts with her claim to her sacred fire, which is to simply save Catherine Martin in this case. This story has a wonderful backstory for her sacred fire. The saving of the lamb. She tells this story to Hannibal under protest. She's resistant to sharing this very intimate detail. But she tells about after her father died, she went to to work on a ranch, and it was a good man. He was good to her, but he was a rancher, and she was awakened one night because she heard the screaming of the lambs, and she goes out, and she decides she's going to try to save one of these lambs, and she opens the gate. The lambs don't run, so she took one and she ran. Now, I'm a novelist, so I always try to put myself into this human moment. And I've had my dog escape on me, run away out the front door, and I've had to pick him up and take him back. I'm a full-grown man. I try to work out, and carrying a dog for a couple blocks is not an easy thing. So imagining a 10-year-old girl lifting a lamb and carrying it at all is pretty heroic of her to try to save this lamb. And she confesses, sadly, that she let the lamb go at some point because it was too cold. Or it was too cold outside and the lamb was too heavy. And Hannibal asked her, what happened to your lamb? And she said, they killed it. So her sacred fire, her feminine desire to help and protect, was right there in that story, and she failed. She failed to protect that lamb. And the namesake of the story, the Silence of the Lambs, Hannibal says, "You will tell me when those lambs stop screaming." And he says that to her because she admits she has nightmares where she's waking up in the middle of the night and the lambs are screaming and she jolts awake because this failure has haunted her. And that's part of what motivates her to try to save Catherine Martin. So there's clearly a difference in approach to what her sacred fire, how it should be expressed in the world. She has her reasons and the FBI has theirs. So they do have a claim on her. Now, in this story, the masked Minotaur, who's Buffalo Bill, does not have a direct claim on Clarice Starling, in my opinion. I think you could say he has her attention, but I don't think that's enough to say that he is claiming her sacred fire. He is the focal point for her sacred fire. However, I will say that the masked Minotaur, and this is where I think the feminine desire is very important. The feminine, what Buffalo Bill covets femininity. This is discussed in the movie to the point of him murdering women and literally trying to build a woman's suit. In fact, I noticed for the first time he wears a necklace, Buffalo Bill, in one scene, and it's that little statue of like it's called the Fat Lady, and it's an old like Bronze Age carving of a woman with exaggerated breasts and hips and stuff. Anyway, he's wearing that.
Was it?
What's that?
Oh, was it? I remember he put it focused on a necklace, and I thought there must be significant, but I didn't pick up on that. I thought it was more geometric. So he's wearing like the fertility cult, like the Mesopotamian or whatever fertility cult.
Yes, he does wear other necklaces. Oh, okay. So you didn't miss that.
Okay.
But I noticed at the end he was wearing that fertility cult feminine statue, like an idol, right? An idol to be worshipped, according to him. So what's interesting about this, let me ask you a question. So I'll get into something that I want to come back to this idea of possessive love because it does relate to the masked Minotaur. And in fact, this movie helped me understand something very essential about the idea of femininity as expressed from heroines, because there does seem to be some unique dynamism there. So, but anyway, that's the sacred fire. That's how you would break it down and see how it works. And Hannibal Lecter, think about this, the idea of being attracted to the sacred fire, an attractive type of force. And again, it doesn't have to be sexual attraction. Hannibal Lecter, when he asks her a bunch of questions later, he's curious about why she wanted to join the FBI. He's curious about her. So he's attracted to her backstory. That's what he focuses on. That's what he wants to know about her. And obviously Buffalo Bill is attracted to femininity in a way that's barbaric. So anyway, the feminine essence, I think, actually plays a role in the sacred fire for heroines in some stories. And I think this is one of them. And I want to come back to this because the captivity bargain, when we get to that, which is later in the movie, it's not up front, gets into some of this a little at a different level.
Okay. So sacred fire. No, captivity bargain's next.
Okay. So the captivity bargain, a lot of times this does take place in the beginning of a story. However, in this story, I believe it takes place in the middle end. It takes place in a different order. So this is why I always, even for myself as a writer, like don't get too married to a single structure if it doesn't work. I think James Bacon was mentioning the idea of why tie yourself to something? Couldn't that be limiting? It's only limiting if you let it be, in my opinion. Like, I think there are ways to think outside the box and find what works for your story. So in this story, the captivity bargain is kind of a famous scenario. Clarice Starling is very guarded with her private life. She's very insecure about her poverty. And in the beginning, her and Hannibal strike a deal. The deal is you give me information about Buffalo Bill and I'll give you privileges. They start bartering. Remember, she makes that fake deal. She's like, you can walk on the beach under SWAT team surveillance. You get all these privileges and perks. You know, you can have better living conditions as long as you help me with this case. That's the deal. Hannibal gives a psychological profile of Buffalo Bill, and Clarice and the FBI offer perks. This deal falls apart and changes. It comes to light that the FBI, who used Clarice, by the way, used her, the native culture in this story, the deal falls apart. However, Hannibal makes a new deal with Clarice, and I believe this is the best example within the story of what would be a captivity bargain. She goes, "Can't you just help me? Just give me information." And he goes, "No." He comes up with what is the famous quid pro quo, which in Latin means this for that. So it is a bargain. It is a negotiated bargain. And what does Hannibal want? He wants her to share intimate details about her private life. She's a very private, and I always found this to be puzzling because I asked myself, I'm like, what is Hannibal getting out of this? What is he really getting out of this? He can't sleep with Clarice, so that's why I said this is not about sexuality, even though there might be overtones to it. And he even says at one point, people think we're in love. They'll say we're in love. Like, there's overtones to it. And he has that creepy finger brush on her hand when he hands her the papers. There's overtones, but clearly he's not trying to get laid. Clearly. So he is getting something in this bargain. And what it is, in my opinion, is some proximity to that feminine essence, to her sacred fire. He is getting close to her feminine desire to help and protect. Like that warm fire that's mesmerizing and warm. He's attracted to it. And so the bargain is, you let me know about you, come close to your sacred fire, and I'll help you catch Buffalo Bill. That's the captivity bargain. And the reason I say it's captivity is because Clarice absolutely does not want to share these details of her private life to a serial killer. And if you remember at the beginning of the story, and this is part of the Labyrinth thing, cultural rules, do not break these rules. One of the rules that she's given is do not tell Hannibal Lecter anything personal. Don't do it.
Yeah.
You don't want Hannibal Lecter walking around in your head. And we know this is dangerous because Miggs is killed because Hannibal Lecter whispers to him, gets in his head, and Miggs offs himself in the cell.
That's what James was just bringing up here. He gets in the head.
Yes.
He's able to kill Miggs just by talking to him.
Right. Because that's the power of Hannibal Lecter. And so we know as the viewer or the reader, I have read the book as well, that this is dangerous for her to make this bargain. You don't want Hannibal Lecter walking around in your head. She gives up some of the most personal details of her entire life to this serial killer who's dangerous with personal details. That's why I think it's still a captivity bargain, because it is certainly something she does not want. However, one of the criteria is the heroine does do this willingly. So she's begging him at one point for details about Buffalo Bill, and he goes, "No, I will listen now." And he turns away, and she then starts to answer questions. And the quid pro quo, the bargain, takes place. She gives him details. He gives her clues about the identity of Buffalo Bill. It's a great captivity bargain in a sense that's not the Princess in the Tower, to show you how you can manifest these in the story in new ways. And I think that feminine essence, which satisfied Hannibal, as that was the deal. This satisfied him. He didn't use it to kill her. He used it. In fact, when she's done, he closes his eyes rather sympathetically, and he's like, "Thank you, Clarice," because he knew that she gave herself to him in earnest. It was sincere. And he appreciates that. Secondly, the idea of the feminine essence being part of the sacred fire is paralleled in the story with Buffalo Bill. The feminine essence is what Buffalo Bill covets, to the point of murdering. So what Hannibal got from a quid pro quo, voluntary, that's one of the differences between the beast and the minotaur. Buffalo Bill does not get it voluntarily. He goes and tries to physically pull it out of, physically extract it from women by wearing their skin. That is his solution to the same desire to have the sacred fire. The mass minotaur takes it in a brutal way. So, and it is a feminine essence. And another story that you could think of that that shows a bargain where there's a feminine essence traded is The Little Mermaid. The voice, she sings that little melody, and Ursula takes the voice out of her. Again, there's a bargain being made, and there seems to be a feminine essence attached to that piece of Ariel that she gave up. Some part of her feminine essence, her voice. So anyway, I think that's strongly paralleled in the story, and it's very consistent throughout the story, including the necklace, like we spoke about, the idol, the idea of idolizing femininity in an evil, brutal, terrible way versus voluntarily, like Hannibal was able to get through a quid pro quo.
Now, Sable Phoenix and James are talking about the symbology of eating. Then that because Sable Phoenix says, "Oh, it's interesting. Male sex drives are intensely connected with the hunger drive as well.
It's a base impulse."
And I thought more than he was implying that he'd like to eat her, which is seriously creepy. But then I just realized it's the same thing.
It's similar. That's why I think the imagery of the dark wolf-like character and the innocent virgin is so persistent across cultures and throughout time. There is a sense of predatory behavior in that male impulse, and Silence of the Lambs is right. I mean, it's all over that impulse from physically devouring people to physically carving them up in order to satisfy what it is you covet. That story really gets into some of those things. That's why I think the feminine desire, the reason I kept the word feminine desire as part of her sacred fire is because her feminine essence seems to be part of what attracts people to her. And it's what makes her interesting to Hannibal. And Hannibal could not have sex with her like that. He wasn't bargaining for sex. And by the way, sexual desire isn't even what Buffalo Bill was pursuing. They made it a point to say during the autopsy, he goes, there's no evidence of physical rape or abuse from Hannibal's or from Buffalo Bill's victims. He does not rape them. He does not abuse them. So he is physically there for the feminine. He is physically trying to take the feminine essence from these women, Buffalo Bill. That idea of extraction, pulling it from them physically. So anyway, it's a great story when you dig into the archetype. It matches up very well. The two doppelgangers, the two serial killers, one that respects the feminine essence. Shoot, my hands are off center here. And one who respects it enough to get voluntary consent in the quid pro quo, and one who does not. He's a murderer. And if you think about the idea of the sacred fire, the feminine desire to help her protect, what does Buffalo Bill do to lure in his victims? He asks for help. The feminine desire to help. He uses that against Catherine Martin when he's trying to lift the chair into the back of the van. He's like, "Could you help me?" And she's like, "Yeah, I'll help you." He uses this beautiful thing against these women, and it's a tragic thing when you think about that. So it's very consistent. So the feminine desire to help and protect, I've worded it carefully because it applies in all of these different from all of these different vantage points. It works.
Okay. Do we go to the Black Swan, or do you want to come back to that?
I could. We could do some quickly. Like Call to Adventure is right off the bat. She's called off of the training course. Literally, she's on the jogging course, and some guy shows up. I don't know who wants. Hey, find Clarice. She's on the obstacle course.
Right.
I mean, who wants to go get this guy? Goes and gets her, and he's like, Clarice, Jack Crawford wants to see you. And Jack Crawford describes his call to adventure as an interesting errand. He's like, it's more of an interesting errand. Now, she doesn't know it, but she's being used by her native culture, which again, in the story is the FBI culture. She's used by him. But the call to adventure is Jack Crawford calling her into the office. And you notice there is no refusal of the call.
And I thought about that as I was watching it this afternoon. I was like, she didn't refuse the call.
Nope. Her sacred fire helps to understand why. She's not going off to confront a certain type of evil that's far, far from home. She's going to confront a member of her native culture, and she's been eager for this. And that sacred fire in our heroines, that burns bright. And so when they get that opportunity, and it's not a warrior trope, they tend to say, you got it. She's ready to go. She's very eager. And what's funny is she's not overconfident. She never came across to me as overconfident or she was very vulnerable in the story. In the movie, she's very vulnerable, which makes me like her all the more because that's so much more believable to me. And she accepts the call to adventure without a refusal, and she accepts it soberly and willingly, and she sees it as a genuine opportunity to do good in the world and to fulfill her sacred fire, her claim, her feminine desire to help and protect. So anyway, that's easy. The call to adventure. It happens right off the bat. It's a beautiful narrative device that gets the story going right away. So it's worth it here to go into the cult of deception next because
let's do it.
So I mentioned that there's a constant tension between the heroine and the native culture. And in this story, it is the culture of the institutional culture of the FBI. And this comes out several ways. Jack Crawford represents the father figure, I guess you could say, of the native culture. He seems to care about Clarice. He seems to be very paternal toward her, but he also lies to her. He withholds information from her, and he embarrasses her in front of several police officers in one scene. So as good as he is, like I think most of us like his character, we also get, when you really think about it, he abuses this relationship with Clarice in the sense that he fulfills some of the cult of deception. There's a time where she asks very gently and very, very earnestly. She's like, if that was the case, why didn't you just let me in on it? And he stops and he thinks about it and he looks at her and he gives her a very stern look and he goes, if I would have sent you in there with an actual agenda, Hannibal would have toyed with you and then he would have turned to stone. And then Jack Crawford turns away and turns his back on Clarice because he just gave her the truth. And it kind of devastates her because he realizes that she can be a pawn to the native culture's claim to her sacred fire, which is you'll help us catch the bad guy our way, even if it means at your expense. So that conflicts with her desire to help and protect somebody. Her feminine desire to help and protect, that clashes because now she's not really helping solve the case. She's being manipulated by her professional mentors or her professional elders, her peers, whatever you want to say. There's another scene that's pretty powerful where they find one of the bodies, they bring the body out of the river. So she goes, I think it's to West Virginia. It seems to be a rural town with rural police officers. And they come in, the FBI agents come in, and Jack Crawford, again, the representative of the native culture here, leans into the cop. He goes, sir, there's certain aspects about the sexual nature of this crime that we don't want to mention to everybody. And he signals Clarice. So the cop gives Clarice an annoyed look and he's like, okay, let's get out. For the girl, we'll get out of here. We'll talk about this dangerous crime elsewhere. And the movie makes a strong point because after they leave, all the cops just stare at her. I was more sympathetic toward feminist causes watching Silence of the Lambs just by these moments of discomfort that you can clearly see with Clarice. And then she confronts Jack Crawford about that. And she goes, he senses she's bothered by it. Jack Crawford goes, it really burned you when I stuck you when I let you go. He actually says the words, it's just smoke. So smoke and mirrors, cult of deception. It's just smoke, Clarice. I had to get him out of there. And Clarice counters with the most poignant, simple answer. She goes, it matters, sir. It matters that you embarrassed me. And I thought that was very poignant.
She said that it was something like, because they look to you to determine how to act.
Yes. She gives him an example. She goes, cops look at you, see how you act. It matters. And he accepts her answer. He actually considers it, in my opinion, and takes it to heart. Like
he says, point taken.
Point taken. Yeah. So she pushed. She's like, you embarrassed me back there. And he's like, don't worry. I embarrassed you for the FBI's cause. This is our way of solving it. And she's like, but that conflicts with if I'm going to be serious as an FBI agent, you can't embarrass me like this. And he's like, okay, interesting. Point made. So he's going to think twice before embarrassing Clarice again. It's a great moment. It's done with very little dialogue. And notice the heroine doesn't have to punch Jack Crawford or body slam him or give him a harsh quip to put him in his place. She does it with dignity. And that had a bigger impact on me as a male watching to take her side in this than any sharp quip to put him down ever would have, where you roll your eyes sometimes at some of these scenarios. But so there's clearly a cult of deception with her and the FBI. I don't think I need to get into detail about the deception that the Masked Minotaur uses. The basis of tracking him down is all based on deception. He uses multiple aliases, Jane Gum. The chat might know, but they're all variations of like Jane Gun, or whatever, the J and the G. So obviously there's a huge deception in hiding himself that she has to also get through. So I think the cult of deception is natural in the hunting a killer side, but I wanted to point out how the cult of deception also works in terms of the native culture. I think I mentioned last time also the presence of ulterior motives being a problem for heroines. This comes up a couple times in the story. Dr. Chilton tries to hit on her, and she has to adjust him away from his ulterior motive of maybe taking her out on a date and sleeping with her to just show me where Hannibal is. And also the other guy, the entomologist, hits on her. He's like, "Do you ever go out for cheeseburgers?" And notice she handles it better. She kind of laughs at him and flirts back, but it's like, not going to happen. So she's becoming more proficient in redirecting that ulterior motive. So I do think that it's part of the cult of deception, the emergence of ulterior motives. And in this story, several men hit on her and try to distract her from her task of saving or protecting a life into something else. So anyway, that's my analysis of the cult of deception.
Okay. Let me. There's an interesting comment from James here. So we'll go to the Chamber of Knowledge, but this goes back a little bit. So let me pick this up before we go too far, because James does counter a little bit on the idea of the eating and sex. He says, "I don't think the hunger angle is a sex analog in this specific film, though. He's a sin eater, and I do like this take. It's a way to destroy what he judges as impropriety, and that's why he doesn't eat Clarence. She's been judged as worthy." I think that's interesting because she also brings up the point that you don't take trophy, and he's like, "No, that you eat them." Yeah, so that's I'm gonna have to think more about that.
No, James, that's a great point. Hannibal Lecter does seem to have some kind of a code. Yeah. Ask yourself this: I think most of us are fascinated by Hannibal Lecter and like him as a villain, and I think it's because of what you just mentioned, that he has some sort of code that he abides by, just like the Godfather. He's a despicable person; he's a murderer. But we like these villains because they follow some sort of a code. And I think James is right. And I did try to make a point that this was not about sex in this show or this story. I think there's overtones, there's suggestions, there's appetite, there's base appetites. All those things are hinted at. But if you break the film down and look under every rock, sex was never the motivating factor for even Buffalo Bill, the serial killer. It wasn't, to James's point, the motivation for Hannibal Lecter. And I do believe that's why he spared Clarice. Think about it. If I'm right, and and Hannibal was attracted to her sacred fire, he wouldn't want to destroy that or put that sacred fire out in the world. So he just said, "Leave me alone." And she's like, "I can't promise that." So I think James is exactly correct. I think the point was that the idea of, archetypally speaking, eating can have sexual overtones. I think vampires are great archetype. They bite the neck. The neck is actually famous in body language for being exposed or a point of vulnerability. So being bitten on the neck or offering your neck up is an extreme submissive body language. So being penetrated or bitten in the neck, you're biting. It's definitely a sexual overtone. But I think in Silence of the Lambs, it is not sexual. Even though it may feel that way at times, it's not there. So I think James is right.
Yeah, I like that too. And God, if I'll have to watch it again and see the kinds of people that because he did talk about people that were unworthy. So I think that it's possible that Clarice is here. I'm going to find out about her and figure out what, but then, okay, I think she's worthy. I think there's something like that.
Well, and at the end of the movie, while the credits are rolling, who is Hannibal following?
with the jailer. It means
Dr. Chilton.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have an old friend for dinner, and he literally is dressed as a tourist, and he follows him. So that would actually support James's theory as well, that he eats people as a form of punishment, and he believes Dr. Chilton is worthy of such punishment. So that fits.
All right. What about chambers of knowledge?
This is easy and loaded. Silence of the Lambs has multiple chambers, multiple chamber guardians, and multiple social tests. I think the first one is her going to Dr. Chilton. The social test is him trying to hit on her and her parrying that to various levels of success, and getting him to fulfill the function, which is to turn the key and let her in to see Hannibal Lecter. That was, I believe, the first test. She then and there's sometimes puzzles and clues, just like in the David Bowie film Labyrinth. She has to solve puzzles. Hannibal gives her, look inside yourself, Clarice. And that's a riddle. And she solves it. It's a yourself storage facility, which takes her to another chamber. The door is locked. Typical archetypal chamber problem. There is a chamber guardian. It's an old man who cannot open the door for her, nor will his assistant, who detests physical labor. She has to solve it. And she does it by using a car jack to get in there. And my wife pointed out, I actually never noticed this, the door closes on her. You can hear it thud. She doesn't react much. That's why I don't think I ever noticed it, but there's a huge thud, and then the FBI has to come in and get her out of that bay. So she's trapped. Anyway, she enters the chamber. She's walking through the subconscious mind of Buffalo Bill. That's what I think this is. It's the subconscious mind. There's all sorts of weird artifacts in there. There's a hearse in there where there's a mannequin, a headless mannequin. And then there's also a head of a man, a real head, a decapitated head of Benjamin Rasbell, I think is the character's name, who's been decapitated and preserved in there. And what's even more horrifying, if you take it one step, the mannequin is headless. You can almost imagine that this person putting that real head on top of the mannequin and hanging out with it in the back of a hearse. That's a pretty grim, gruesome event that would be taking place in this chamber. So it's pretty spooky. And there's another clue in this chamber. We don't find out till later, but there's a moth's head in Benjamin Rasbell's head, which he uncovers inside this chamber. So that's another one. I also believe the entomology room. She goes to the entomology room that you see all the archetypal imagery of insects and butterflies and moths. And you have two little kind of nerdy chamber guardians in there. And the other guy tries to hit on her again. And she parries this one much more successfully. But she also gets another clue. Meet Acherondia Styx, the death's head moth. So now she finds out that whoever the killer is has this moth. And if you know the story, you know that the knowledge of this particular moth is linked directly to the unmasking of the Minotaur. So this is a pretty vital clue she gets in this chamber. And I also think there was another chamber. I believe the autopsy was a little bit of a chamber guardian chamber moment, because she has to enter the chamber and she is asked to pass a test, which is, all right, Clarice, you're up. She has to analyze the body that was pulled out of the river. It's very difficult for her to do this, because I would imagine it would be difficult to be around a dead body at all. She has to analyze.
In front of her superiors.
What's that? And yeah, your superiors are standing there. So you have the chamber guardians there. Oddly, though, I feel like the chamber guardian is the ghost of this woman. I don't know if I would. This is how I see it, because I think her sacred fire is linked to protecting to this woman's life that's been ended. So her job is to analyze her correctly, because if she does, she'll save the next one. So I think her battle is not to impress her superiors, in my opinion. It's to get the analysis right for the sake of these women. That's my take on it. Anyway, it's great. And she does a great job analyzing it. And I noticed, she notices it looks like glitter in the nails, which she goes, it looks like town to me. And I found that to be interesting because I don't know if a man would have picked out that detail and understood the significance. She's like, girls who wear glitter are town girls. They're not country girls. Or, she makes an observation that maybe a woman may have this insight that a man may not. So I thought that was an interesting detail she picked out, and made her maybe even better suited to do this analysis. I like that. And yet there's another clue. There's a cocoon in this mouth, just like the one in Benjamin's head. There's another clue in her throat. And what I will say, I actually think that this ties in a little bit to the poisoned apple. The symbolism of the poisoned apple is usually the mouth, the neck, or sometimes the eyes, in that you look glazed or vacant. This was inserted in the neck. So to me, this is symbolic of a poisoned apple. I think there's another one, which I'll get to later, but I think that this ties into the poisoned apple theme because it was in her neck. Clearly, she was poisoned all the way to death in this case. So anyway, yeah, Silence of the Lambs is great for the Chambers and the Chamber Guardians. Tons of examples.
Okay. Yeah, we hit Chamber Guardians at the same time with that.
We did them simultaneously, and the Beast as ally we covered with Hannibal Lecter being the Beast as ally. I'll point out this. The reason I think he adopts her cause, which is he wants her to catch Buffalo Bill, is because he makes a bargain with Dr. Chilton to give the FBI the name of Buffalo Bill. And this is his famous moment. They cart him out. He's wearing the mask. He's in a straitjacket, and the senator is there. And instead of giving her information, he insults her. And it's such a bad insult that everyone around him is horrified. He's like, "Tell me, Mom, where will it tickle you?" And he's talking about her nursing. It's a horrible insult, and it's so horrifying that it's obviously a deal killer. He does not help the FBI, but he does help Clarice. And this scene is where I decided he is helping Clarice and not helping Dr. Chilton get his bones or his fame, and he's not helping the FBI catch Buffalo Bill. He wants Clarice to catch him. And I think, and he doesn't just give her the name. He does demand that Clarice solve the key components on her own. And I think that's good. That makes Clarice a better heroine. Yeah.
Okay.
So, and we talked about Beast as ally early.
Yeah. We went over that early. Okay. Aided by a fragile power.
Okay. So this one's easy, and it has the fragile power is Catherine Martin. She doesn't play a huge role personally in the film, but her presence plays a huge role. And I'll tie her into part 3. Just remember that Catherine Martin is the fragile power.
Who is that?
Catherine Martin is the girl that Buffalo Bill abducts, and she's in the bottom of the well.
Oh, the abductee. Okay.
The abductee, the senator's daughter.
Senator's daughter. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't remember that. Senator's
Yeah,
daughter.
she's the fragile power because she is powerless, typical of fragile powers. She's talked about a lot as a daughter of the senator. So there is even though she's a grown woman, but she is looked at as a daughter. She's looked at through the eyes. Even that little montage on the TV, she's my daughter. Catherine's our daughter. So they really emphasize her role as a daughter and not a mother or any other role. So, and she's clearly fragile because she is in danger.
Okay. So I think that's actually C here. So okay, so C. That's actually like a few good men moment. When he was like, so now who is Santiago is Catherine Martin is the victim. Oh right, write that down. All right, that's important. Okay. So
Exactly.
So the broken truce.
So the broken truce is a little bit more subtle, but it's there. If you understand and we covered it, the tension between Clarice and the native culture, which in this case is the FBI. Clarice's goal is to the feminine desire to help and protect. She wants to do it her way. The FBI has their claim on her. She's not allowed to go see Hannibal Lecter anymore. I don't know if that was made clear in the movie on the first pass, but she's out. She's not really on the case right now. She's not allowed to go see Hannibal Lecter, and the senior FBI members, including Jack Crawford, are going to go get Buffalo Bill on their own. She breaks this truce because she goes behind the FBI. She defies the native culture, and in pursuit of her own sacred fire, her individual agency, she goes and meets with Hannibal Lecter anyway at the museum where he's being held in that prison. And in typical broken truce fashion, where the social forces are mustered against her, where she's either chased or pursued or captured, the police come in and literally march her out of there. Dr. Chilton, he's like, you can't see my client. I have rights. And so the police escort her out. It's not very dramatic, but it's clearly structurally falls in line where she's breaking the rules in the native culture, which is she's not supposed to be there, following her goals instead in order to protect Catherine Martin, and the native culture rejects her. They push her out. She's broken the truce. She's pushed out. And
okay, wait. So you're not talking about when he is out, when Hannibal Lecter's out and he's about to escape. You're right. She returns to the dungeon.
They moved him. He's in Tennessee, I think, at this point. He's in like what looks like a museum.
Oh, right. Yeah, in the museums. Okay, so because I do remember, the police come and grab her from the museum.
Right. So it's small and it's subtle, but structurally it matches up with the role of the broken truce, which is her breaking from the native culture, breaking from the FBI to do her own thing in order to help the fragile power. And she does do that. And the native culture rejects this. They escort her out of there. But the police, which are the law enforcement agents of this area, escort her out. So it's small, but it's there. And she is now on the outside of the FBI looking in. She's not really actively involved at this point. And what she ends up doing is she goes back to interview on her own Frederica Bimmel's friends. She kind of goes to follow an old lead, is what she's really relegated to a menial task, while the big guy, they show the guys in like a C-130 flying in to go pursue Buffalo Bill where they think he's at. So she's on her own at this point. So this is the broken truce. She's not involved with the FBI in this case at that point.
Well, hello, J-Bit 8-Bit. Welcome. Wait, is that your son?
Hi, Jacob. I guess so.
I'm Douglas's son. Well, welcome, Jacob. Welcome. So we were about to go to Poisoned Apple, but right here. So James, and this was something similar that I was thinking of. I'm of the view that cocoons are symbolically establishing the transformation of James Gum. The dead girls are his cocoon, and he's trying transformation. That's
correct.
What he's doing.
Well, yes, I think James is correct. I think there's even dialogue that addresses that. Hannibal says, our Billy's trying to change too. Remember, she goes, we found something. And he goes, was it a butterfly? She's like, yes, it was a moth. And Hannibal's like, the significance, whatever. He knows that the symbolism of that moth is the ability to physically transform. And correct, the women that Buffalo Bill abducts, he is physically taking their skin to transform into them by building this woman's suit. So it is pretty horrifying stuff, but yes, I think that is correct.
So we've got that, but it's still also this imagery for the poison apple.
So the poisoned apple structurally is something that is delivered by the masked minotaur.
Which is exactly where we are now.
Yeah, it disorients the heroine or knocks her out or makes her subconscious. If you pull up the criteria.
Oh, let's go. Let's go down. Oh, yeah, we forget about that. Let's go down here. Captivity bargain.
Yeah, so the criteria for the poisoned apple is it's a form of an attack. Broken truce.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's usually delivered by the masked minotaur. It's usually delivered in bad faith, meaning it's premeditated or disguised. It usually knocks out, disorients, or disables the heroine. The poison is usually something internal, ingested, injected, implanted, or imparted. Usually includes a restrained or unconscious heroine. often depicts the masked minotaur hovering nearby the heroine, usually precedes an attempt to convert the heroine. Usually it's an attempt to convert. I don't think that part necessarily applies here. And the minotaur often tries to extract, desecrate, or subordinate the heroine's sacred fire. In this case, it's not the heroine directly, in that he's taking their skin, but I think some of this criteria applies to the women he is murdering, Buffalo Bill, and some of it will apply to Clarice directly in the end of the film. So in my opinion, the moment that most matches this archetypal event is when he turns off the lights. She's in the dark. She's looking for Buffalo Bill in the basement, and he switches off the lights. She's clearly disoriented. One of the big things about poisoned apples is it usually shuts down. It's like I call it in my book the forced shutdown. It bypasses the heroine's ability to fight back. This matches that. The gun's visibly shaking. She's looking around. She can't see him. She's disoriented. It includes, and it doesn't include a restrained or unconscious heroine, but it does include a disoriented, defenseless, a blind heroine. And the minotaur is hovering nearby the heroine in this scene. He actually reaches out for her at one point, and then, before he tries to shoot her. So I think that's the moment that matches the poisoned apple in terms of the structure. But symbolically, I think this goes to James's point. Symbolically, I think the bug cocoon in the throat also harkens back to some of this. Where he is trying, unconscious heroines, delivered in bad faith, extracting something. So I think that some of that symbolism does definitely transfer to these victims who are women, where that feminine essence is trying to be literally ripped away from them by force.
Because that's what he's done that to others, to the other heroines that we don't have to have their story. But that's
correct.
Them. That's what's happening to them. Yeah,
correct. So part of this archetype is them. Is given to them. I just found it weird that they would choose, and I think storytellers do this on accident, and they end up in some of these, or they're very knowledgeable and they do this on purpose, but they literally put that bug cocoon in the throat. And in my book, I actually mentioned some of the physical attention to poisoned apples being the throat, mouth, or eyes.
Well, I think this is interesting. James says, "Didn't the cocoon demystify Clarice?" Though I think what you're trying to say, Doug, is that it's two different. We've got two different elements, or we've got the elements of the poison apple, and then some elements are being put in one to some of the females in here, and then some of the elements are put toward her.
Right?
So, yeah. For Clarice, it was a demystification. It was a clue, but as far as the ingestion, all that somebody else went on, that was that.
Right. In terms of the archetypal constants with this theme, that cocoon in the throat meets the criteria it meets half the criteria of the poisoned apple. And the other half is met in that moment when Buffalo Bill turns off the lights and has Clarice Starling disoriented and trapped. So that archetype is split up, in my opinion, one symbolically and one structurally as part of that story, where the masked minotaur is the one there. He is disorienting. He is he's altering the state of the heroine. He's bypassing her ability to fight back. She's clearly disoriented. He's in the room with her. He's hovering nearby. So half of the criteria works with the symbolism and the other half works with the scene with Clarice. Yeah, a split archetype. I think that's a good way to say it. And I've seen things like this before, where parts of an archetype are split up. I just found it fascinating that so the scene where she's disoriented in the dark doesn't have the ingestion scene.
Right.
So
That's missing
weird
from that one. Yeah.
Right. So it's weird to me and interesting to me that the exact parts of this archetype that are missing in the scene are accounted for elsewhere in the story almost perfectly. I just found that fascinating.
Well, that goes back to I'm not taking any of this as confrontational, James.
Oh yeah. By the way, I don't mind even if you're peppering questions. It's good. I think all of this is in good faith. All of us here are serious about this and thinking about this. So no matter how many questions you ask, I won't take it personal ever, unless you're like deliberately trying to insult me.
The entire thing here is constructive. This whole channel is about being constructive. So that doesn't necessarily mean that you always agree or that you can't be challenged. It's just always in the spirit of being constructive. That's
totally. And yeah, I'm not, you don't have to agree with me. I'm giving you my perspective because it's new in that this model is new. Yeah. So it should be something new to think about. But that doesn't mean that there's other ways to think about this or things that I haven't thought of or other layers that have been yet unexplored. I think that's awesome. So I don't take it personal no matter how many questions are thrown out.
I was going to say that I've taken from Drake, who talks about the physical and the spiritual side, and that you've got the physical side of your plot and stuff that's happened, but there's certain things in the story that the reader needs to internalize, and he used the word ingest as the story is going through and things like that. And I really like that, as a general kind of framework for something like that. So that means that's interesting when you're talking about the splitting of the archetype here, that, okay, well, in this particular story, we're going to have the darkness or whatever, but we're missing something on perhaps some type of psychological level or something. And that's why, okay, the idea of the cocoon in the throat comes up. Is that, I mean, the kind of the source of the exploration of these things anyway, or of my conversations here, has been sort of psychological, I suppose, psychological in nature. There's certain things that we need to see in the story. And so it'd be really interesting if, like, oh, that's true, we're missing something, but then because if the story didn't have the thing in the throat that had happened to that, well, would we feel like we were missing something?
We might. I think you're onto something personally. My personal opinion is, when the archetypes are present, max out on it. If you understand that your story has one of these moments, load it up, be creative. And the more creative you get, the more distinctive your scene will look. And when those are missing, and I think I've heard you say stuff like this before, sometimes it feels like there's something missing in a story. Or I think you said it in Labyrinth, that it could have been better organized or something. The David Bowie film, you said, I think there's opportunities missed. Probably true. But if you understand what you're working with, put those in there. And my thought too is it could have also been incidental, because in this particular story, the masked Minotaur doesn't really have a relationship with Clarice. So his ability to try to capture Clarice is limited to the one time he meets her. So standing in for that are the other women who he does meet.
Because he's got the relationship with the women. Yeah, right. Because we're missing something. We're missing this component of his relationship with her.
Right.
Therefore, we have to experience that relationship
vicariously through these other victims, these other women. Secondly, the one time he does meet Clarice, he still has that Minotaur impulse to disorient her. It's not a fair fight. That's what I keep trying to like. The hero's journey is a little bit more of a fair fight. Usually, it's single. Heroines. The part of the purpose of the poisoned apple and important meanings is it's an unequal fight. The Minotaur bypasses the heroine's ability to fight back. That's not fair. That's not a warrior trope. Usually in a warrior trope, there's still some semblance of a warrior code where, okay, at least we're evenly matched. The rules are the same, and I'll just best you. That's not what heroines in these stories are up against. They're up against someone who is bypassing their ability to fight back. And that's why I think the scene matches that moment. He's not playing by the rules. He disoriented her. He's taking her out. Now, he doesn't try to convert her, but he does reach out for her. I think that's symbolic of that wanting to touch the sacred fire. But he is there to kill her in this scene. So, and I think that's by necessity. I don't think he has a choice in his logic. The solution is to kill the agent, who's there. So the other one, now the next three, actually the next four are very simple and very quick and easy.
Okay.
The unmasking is when the Death's Head moth lands on some yarn or something she's in the house. She's asking what she thinks to be a normal guy. She's looking around. She sees all the objects of a residential house, except that moth. That moth lands. It's out of place, And she's done her homework earlier in the story.
It's a very specific moth.
It's very rare, very specific moth, totally. And she knows in that moment, without a doubt, this is Buffalo Bill. And her acting is great. Her look at him to realize I'm standing with Buffalo Bill is awesome. And secondly, I really appreciate Buffalo Bill, the actor, him realizing she knows who I am. There's this weird tension that builds, and she's like, very good, Mr. Gordon. Like, she doesn't, can I use your phone, please? And he's like, what do I do now? She knows. And he makes his escape. He runs away, that weird little thing he does, and he runs off. That's the unmasking. He's unmasked. That's not James Gumb. That's Buffalo Bill, the animal tyrant.
Oh,
the Minotaur at the center of the labyrinth.
I was typing. And it's not because she had all. So not only do we have the death's head moth, which is rare and out of place and something they're looking for, but that also she had already connected sewing and what he was doing to the women.
Yes.
So it connected both of those two things, the death's head moth with sewing.
Yes.
Got it.
Right. So the symbolism is brilliantly chosen by the filmmakers and or the author. They include all of the clues you need. This is what I mean by archetype. If you understand this masked Minotaur and what he does, these are the symbols that would identify him. And sure enough, one symbol in particular, the death's head moth, all bets are off at that point. So the unmasking is a critical moment, and it alters everything. The Minotaur's unmasked. He makes his retreat. Home as battleground. No question about it. Now, she's not in her home, but she's in a residential home. And this is I cannot believe how many times I see this in Heroine stories. The center of the labyrinth is a home. It's amazing. And here it is again. She's in the center of the labyrinth. She's in a residential home. This should be a safe, it's a normal looking house in the neighborhood. Seems to be, Mrs. Littman's house. People know her. This is not a place of safety. This is a nightmare. This is hell on earth here in this house. And he descends into the basement. So home is the battleground for Clarice Starling. And again, I like to point out that although single combat is de-emphasized, Clarice is a little bit of a warrior. The film is clear. She's trained as an FBI agent with guns, and she is technically a warrior, a novice warrior, but she does have some warrior ability. She draws her gun and she goes in pursuit. And I think that's huge. I don't know if many of us would go in pursuit of this man and enter that basement. I don't know if I would. That's pretty scary when she goes down there. I'm like, wait, call somebody.
well, right. Yeah, I know. I actually thought about that too. That what would the protocol there be? Now, you don't know whether or not there is another exit from the basement, but you could have him trapped and then call for additional help.
Well,
but
so
you don't
here's
know
my
that he
theory.
could escape from another place out of the basement.
Right. So my theory now, in a lot of horror films, which also take place in a home, the hero or heroine always does the worst thing. Let's look here. And I don't think that's what was going on here. I think if I'm right about Clarice's sacred fire, her feminine desire to help and protect, she feels that clock is ticking. And if she doesn't go down there now, he will murder Catherine Martin while he has the chance.
Right. Yeah.
So I think she feels she's not going to let her get away. She lost her lamb. She failed in her early story. She's not even going to risk the chance that he will murder her while help is on its way. She goes down there, and I think it's extremely heroic. In fact, I think this ties into the next archetype, which is the shield maiden. I think this is her shield maiden moment. She doesn't think about it rationally. Like, should I get help? Should I do this? What's the protocol? I think you just said. Those are all rational thoughts. That's what a rational person would do. They would think about those things. I call the heroine impulse for the shield maiden super rational, because it is rational under a very specific criteria. It's almost transcendent of reason. It's not first level reasoning. Her reasoning is based on her sacred fire. Catherine Martin cannot die. Therefore, shield maiden. I got to go down. So it is super rational. It's not rational in the normal sense, but she's not operating on that system. She's a heroine, and this is her Shield Maiden moment. She goes down into that. So the criteria for the Shield Maiden is that the fragile power, which is Catherine Martin in this story, shares the battlefield with the heroine, typically just a few feet away. That's a criteria. And this meets that criteria. Like Ripley and Newt. Newt is there with her a few feet away. That's a heroine issue. This happens in heroine-centric stories. Male heroes on the journey tend not to have a secondary character on the battlefield that they have to worry about. In heroine-centric stories, a lot of them do. And she does. She's got Catherine Martin right there on the battlefield with the Minotaur with her. And she interposes herself between the Minotaur and Catherine Martin. She is not going to let the Minotaur get her. And this is extremely heroic to me, that she takes the masked Minotaur on his own home turf, gun drawn, with the intent to save Catherine Martin. Another criteria for the Shield Maiden is that it's not self-sacrificial, even if it looks like it is. The heroine intends to survive the confrontation. This is not combat in the warrior sense, in the warrior trope. She intends to survive, no matter how reckless it might look that she's throwing herself in front of the fragile power or blocking the passage of the masked Minotaur. No matter how self-sacrificial it looks, she intends to survive. If you understand the super rational logic of the Shield Maiden, the purpose of the Shield Maiden is to protect that fragile power. If you put yourself in front and die, fragile power is gone. You failed. You cannot meet this criteria without also intending to survive. So it adds a level of heroism that I think is underappreciated. Not only is she not intending to sacrifice herself, she is intending to combat someone or something that's greater than herself, and she has to win. It's the logic of the Shield Maiden. She must prevent this, the Minotaur. So she's up. She does this. She's up to this task. Even when the Minotaur delivers the poisoned apple and she's disoriented and her abilities are bypassed, she continues to look for the Minotaur, which is amazing. She's still looking for him. She's listening. She's doing whatever she has, and she's scared. The fact that that gun is shaking in her hand does not make her look weak to me. It makes her look more heroic, because even though she's afraid, she continues on. To me, that's the definition of heroism. So she does this. She has her Shield Maiden moment. Home is the battleground. The fragile power is a few feet away. All of this lines up with the Heroine's Labyrinth themes that are consistent. And he cocks the gun, and she hears it. She turns and shoots him. Boom, boom, boom. She unloads her clip. This guy is down. And we get to what I would refer to as the broken spell. If you scroll down and look at the criteria,
let's go to that.
The broken spell is usually a rapid change of the environment, and it usually goes from darkness. Yeah, transition moves from darkness to light. This meets that criteria. The window cracks. The sunshine pours in. Rapid rearrangement of the world that surrounds the heroine. And I believe this happens. What looked like a dungeon and terrifying place is now filled with sunlight. It focuses on that thing that spins. It shows butterflies in a pleasant light. The central deception of the Minotaur is revealed as false. He's not a good guy. He's bad. He's not Jane Gum. The hidden victims are freed. That occurs in Catherine Martin. The imagery and symbolism highlights growth, life, and creation. I think that is correct. Catherine Martin will live. I don't think creation. I guess the final symbolism is that butterfly thing that's spinning. So maybe that's the idea that life will go on. We'll move past this moment. But a lot of the unmasked Minotaur is defeated, sometimes reformed, not him. But that is the broken spell. It's very small, but it's archetypally correct. Some are very dramatic. Moana, it's dramatic. Tafiti, the green living life spirals in and takes over the islands. It's very dramatic. This is very subtle, but it's there. And finally, atonement, where the native culture, where the heroine kind of reconciles with herself to some extent. The heroine was right about something that others missed. So atonement is important for a heroine because they have a lot of self-doubts along the way. And here's a moment where emphatically succeeded. They were right.
Your
And now
father is
now the heroine has to live in a world where she's capable of these great deeds. So there's a little bit of atonement with self, but I believe in terms of story, her atonement is really with the native culture. She is seen being awarded her badge, which is a shield, by the way, by the FBI. She becomes an FBI agent. So I think her atonement, she graduated. She's worthy. So I think that, and it's in front of all of her peers, and her friend is there and like winks at her and gives her a thumbs up. So she is now accepted by the native culture as a heroine, as an FBI agent. She has fulfilled her original pursuit for her sacred fire. And then also there's a mini atonement with Hannibal. He calls her while she's being awarded her FBI agent status, and basically says the world is more interesting with you in it. To James's point, he honors his code, the Hannibal code, that you're a real person in the world and the world's more interesting with you in it. And he promises not to eat her as long as she doesn't ever bust him, and she doesn't agree to that. But there is no mother figure, but there is a father figure. And Jack Crawford says to her, your father would be proud of you. And they have a handshake. So she reconciles with Jack Crawford. She reconciles with her father. She reconciled with her own past. She saved the lamb. The lambs have stopped screaming. Yes, James, perfect timing. Have the lambs stop screaming, and we've achieved the silence of the lambs in her pursuit. So beautiful story put together, and the storytellers worked with archetypes brilliantly, in my opinion, in this. And I loved it. I loved watching it again, in fact.
So Brianna says, when I first watched this movie, I was scratching my head at the structure. It felt right, but I wasn't totally sure what the full structure was. This analysis is so fascinating.
Awesome. Awesome. This is what I hope, because if I tried to apply this to the hero's journey, and this is what I think James was asking about earlier, maybe it does line up in a way, but it lines up strongly in this other way. So to Brianna's point, and I've had these moments, Brianna, where I'm like, how does this fit the hero's journey? What is the structure here? And it does not work. The Dark Knight, I remember one time I was like, this is so not the hero's journey. None of this works. One of my favorite all-time movies, Amadeus, one of my all-time favorites. I love the movie. Totally doesn't work with the hero's journey, no matter how much I stretched or pulled it. So with this other way to consider stories, a different structure, I was like, this works now. This works. And now I can use this. And that's what I care about. I can use this. I as a writer, you as a writer can use this immediately. Like like the hero's journey, it can immediately impact your story if you follow it. So if your story lines up with this in a different way, I think you could see that it is different enough from the hero's journey to constitute a separate structure. And that's why I wanted to look at one story in depth, so that we could see how all the pieces fit together structurally, archetypally, in terms of a story arc, and still magically hit all these beats. Coraline is another one we should do. Brianna, you said you liked Neil Gaiman. We should do one day. Heath, maybe Coraline would be another good one.
Coraline? I don't know that one.
Oh, it's great. And Coraline is another one that matches up with the Heroine's Labyrinth real well.
Okay. And actually well, first of all, Andrew said, only caught bits of this, but very well done. I didn't even like this movie, but it was a great way to look at a movie that I was not engaged with. So,
awesome. Yeah.
Well, actually, this is where I was going next. Brianna said, I really wanted to hear you break down The Dark Knight.
Well, it doesn't match up well with the hero's journey. And man, I tried. I tried it. It actually has like an escalating series of events in a way. But this is why I think some superhero genres fit the Heroine's Labyrinth. The idea of a masked minotaur hidden in the native culture is classic villains in comic books. Gotham City is where all the drama takes place for Batman. So, he's trying to hunt down
root out corruption in his society.
Yes. So he doesn't. Now, we could talk about this another time. I think origin stories are good to follow the hero's journey. And the first Batman movie does. With Christian Bale, he leaves the native culture. There's clearly some hero's journey issues there. But after the hero is formed, to sustain the story, a lot of comic books end up using some of the Heroine's Labyrinth beats with a hidden or disguised or masked villain, like the Joker.
I was actually thinking about something very similar to that, like just a few moments ago before you got to that point, because when you were saying that, okay, an origin or you have the hero's origin, okay, but then if you're going to have a story beyond that, okay, then where do you go? Now, one solution, which I don't think is invalid, but one solution is that what you're actually telling is cycles of the hero's journey. You could embed another cycle of the hero's journey, except for you're going to you're just going to a different zone. You're escalating it. You're ratcheting it up. On every step, and you're cycling through this story again. But it would be really interesting to look at. Well, now wait a minute. What if you did a different thing? Especially if, like in the Dark Knight, you do heroine's journey after. I think
hero's journey stories can wear out if you keep repeating them for the same hero. Like one example is Kirk in Star Trek. So in Star Trek 1, the motion picture, there's an outside culture annihilating force that comes in, and Kirk goes out to meet it. In Star Trek 2, The Wrath of Khan, there's a militant conquering villain with the Genesis torpedo, which is once again a planet annihilating torpedo, and he fights him in single combat. But in Star Trek 3, he starts to fight with his own native culture. He has to steal the Enterprise. It is another ship, the Excelsior, comes after him. So now you see Kirk struggling with his native culture. So as you sustain these, and then in Star Trek 4, it's all like it's his native culture from 200 years in the past that he's really fighting against. Star Trek 5, it's Sybok, it's Spock's brother. So. And in Star Trek 6, he's up against his native culture. They're conspiring to start a war with the Klingons. So as it progressed, Kirk's battle becomes more and more against his native culture. You can't keep sending him out to fight yet another culture annihilating villain. It would wear out. It would wear out. So I think the hero's journey, and that's not to knock the hero's journey. They make great stories, but I'm saying to sustain a character's struggle, somehow, some way, these, like in superhero stories, the native culture becomes more and more of an issue for the heroes.
Maybe then that the cycle could go between both, because I could also see. I think I've kind of felt this way when, like, okay, you got this great hero, and maybe Kirk is as a part of this, and what he's supposed to be. Defending things and doing things, but then you increasingly make the internal culture something that's corrupt, and you're like, but I like Starfleet, like Larry, enough of seeing Starfleet corrupt. So arguably, actually, some later Star Trek, I think, got into that too much. Like, all right, okay, fine, we might have that, but then, okay, eventually, we also need to see the hero go back to, hey, my culture is good, and it's threatened by this, instead of constant.
Well, I think the idea in the Heroine's Labyrinth is the idea that your native culture, unless it's a revolutionary tale in which it all has to go, which is rare. This should happen rarely in human history, that everything is corrupt and the whole system has to go. But it happens. I think the idea with the Heroine's Labyrinth is that the native culture is generally good, but it is susceptible to corruption, and the heroine runs into this corruption and fights it and corrects it. Like you said when he's like, point taken, she's telling him, don't use me like a pawn. And he's thinking differently. He shakes her hand I think she changed in some small way the culture of the FBI. I think they took women more seriously after Clarice Starling in the context of this story. I think he thought twice about what he was going to do with how he was going to treat his underlings coming up into the system. So, I think the idea is, and she was right, ultimately, they were wrong. Whatever they did to get the wrong house and the wrong guy, they blew it. She got it right. So the idea is the heroine is restoring the native culture back to its uncorrupted state. I think that's kind of the idea. So for me, what's like Kirk and Starfleet, if you're going to have the heroine's Labyrinth function, he's restoring Starfleet to its better self. It's a better society before it was corrupted. That's the idea. So like in Star Trek 6, they found the conspirators. They've been moved out, and peace was actually brokered between, these arch rival cultures. So I think the heroine's Labyrinth, and again, this isn't my idea. This is out there. I think studying heroines has taught me a lot about what our heroines are up to, why they're heroic, and why they're heroic in ways that I wasn't necessarily considering before. I'm very pro heroine now that I've studied all this. And when I see, like I said, when I see these Shield Maiden moments in stories, I'm moved. I'm moved because it's that super rational logic. She is going to go up against this, and she can't help herself because the logic is she has to protect that fragile power. You can't just withdraw, which is tactical. A tactical withdrawal sometimes makes sense, but if you withdraw and the fragile power is destroyed, heroines don't make that bargain. They don't do that. They tend to engage instead of at a time when they should withdraw. They somehow go out and they engage, and I think it makes them very powerful in a very specific way. And I admire it. I think it's awesome.
Let's see. Retro Nerd Girl is here. Says listening in. Wow, this is dynamic. Now, okay.
Retro Nerd Girl, you're awesome. I've seen some of your videos. Your breakdown of Labyrinth made me so excited to go back and watch that movie. You're so excited about it. It was like contagious.
Yes, everybody do follow Retro Nerd Girl. Got to check out Retro Nerd Girl.
She's awesome.
Now, specifically regarding Campbell, now we're going to get into that because I've got to go through it too, and then Brand's got tons of notes. So we're going to specifically take a look at Campbell because Brianna has a different an interpretation of Campbell that she's saying that what he wrote is not what people attribute to him. So that we're going to get into that once we go through it. So I don't want to speak on that for the second. So actually, the Dark Knight would be great. I'm going to put. I don't have a list of table talks. I'm going to put table talk over here, and I should because a week from tonight we're doing Sleeping Beauty
and Maleficent, right?
Sleeping Beauty together with Maleficent, right? Looking at that same story from both sides.
That will be great.
But then also Dark Knight. I've got a lot to say on Sleeping Beauty and Maleficent. And I've got a lot to say on Dark Knight as well, because that's a story that I draw from a lot, and I really like a lot of material in it. So it'll be interesting to look at it from the heroine's journey perspective as well. So and
the Dark Knight, it's so good. It's like I think a lot when I watch movies or read stories. The Dark Knight, and of course, there's times where I just switch it off. And I love just switching it off and watching The Dark Knight. Heath Ledger is so freaking good in that.
Yeah, and yes, Vision, greetings, but you are definitely going to have to catch up on this one. If you're just coming in late, this was a fantastic one. You've got to catch up on this. So Sleeping Beauty and Maleficent 1 week from tonight with Doug and Brianna. So all three of us will be here in 1 week.
Awesome. That'll be some awesome angles there. Everyone seems to have a different an angle to come in at. That's good.
Yeah. So it's probably going to be a very deep discussion. It probably is. All three of us are probably going to have a lot to say there. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, this one was more, The Silence of the Lambs was something you could look at a single story and just see how these tropes work in a story where it may not have been obvious before. So now if you're watching Silence of the Lambs and you see her enter the Yourself storage bay, you're like, oh, that's clearly a chamber of knowledge. There's a test. There's the test. There's the chamber guardian. Like, you'll be able to see how these stories are put together in a way that, in my opinion, the hero's journey doesn't address these specific issues. It's not that none of them apply. It's not that I love the hero's journey, by the way. Love it. I have no criticism for it, except that it was trying to do too much lifting on its own. It was trying to pull every story up. And I think the Heroine's Labyrinth serves other stories better. And if you could see them as two separate models, you could see one for what it is and see the hero's journey for what it is and ask less of it if it's not applicable to this story necessarily. And then secondly, like we talked, I think that yin and the yang was good. Sometimes you'll see a little bit of both kind of creeping in.
Yeah, I'm going to think more about putting hero in the broad sense, hero, heroine, whatever, in the broad sense up at the top level, and then subdividing that to hero's journey and heroine's labyrinth, and seeing if that works along the structure that I'm. How do you make a hero? Because arguably, at the end of the heroine's journey, you're a hero.
Yes, I mean, so the word hero, I think, is universal, but I think it's used as masculine. I think we use it because we have a word heroine. So our language has provided two words to use, and one tends to be masculine and the other. I think heroine is clearly feminine. What's weird is the more I work on the heroine's labyrinth, the more I use the term more generally. Like sometimes, like when I'm like Amadeus, one of my favorite movies, Mozart's the heroine of that story structurally. So like even I found myself using the term heroine more gender neutral, meaning like in this story, based on the structure, he's the heroine, and he is, structurally speaking. So there's definitely a case to be made that it's all that the genders don't matter as much. I'll just continue to make the case that the hero on the hero's journey seems to have been given to a masculine thumbs up. So we'll just do the yin and the yang. We'll give the heroine, and I named it after the heroine because I discovered it following her stories. So to me, it's a balancing word, but you're right. It doesn't it's not necessarily about gender.
Right. Well, here we've said and on these streams before that when we're using masculine or feminine, we don't necessarily mean that either of those are essentially bodied male or female. Because we've said that we can have women go on the hero's journey, and we can also have men go on the heroine's journey.
Right.
You're giving Captain Kirk an example.
And I totally agree with that.
That's an understood way that we're using these terms here.
Right. But I would like to just make a case for femininity and masculinity. I think those are real, and I think they add dynamism to these stories. So if it's a female on the hero's journey, you will get a feminine dynamism to that journey that may be a little different to a male on that journey who might bring a certain masculine dynamism. So I do think the dynamism counts, but it doesn't have to be the dominant or only force to the story.
No, I agree with that, and I think probably Brianna would too. I
like her analysis
on the same page.
A lot of things.
I guess we'd say if you send a man on the heroine's journey, we're going to have a male energy to the heroine's journey. We need the right terminology here, but yeah, I agree.
Right, like a lot of heroine stories, her sex appeal and beauty have an impact on all the characters around her. There's no getting around it. That tends to happen more with female characters than with male characters, for example. However, archetypally speaking, there's something deeper than just sexual sex appeal and sexuality, which is tied to the sacred fire in a lot of cases. That's what people think they're drawn to. But when you dig down archetypally, it's what I call a creative power of some force. It is a creative force inside the character that is what attracts people. And it is expressed in different ways. Creativity, like in Amadeus, again, his ability to write music was a creative power, and people wanted to capture him for that. It had nothing to do with sex, but it's similar. It mirrors that, so very interesting stuff. But anyway, I hope y'all found this interesting.
Yeah, I certainly did. I think this was very good to do. I'm very glad you recommended doing this because we had gone over a bunch of different just general examples of stuff. So it was really good to take one movie and go through it exactly like this. So this was a great idea. I'm so glad you recommended it. I had a fantastic time tonight.
Awesome. That's awesome.
Do you want to let everybody know for one final time then where they can find you? Because there is information about this. The book is not out yet, The Heroine's Labyrinth, but there is information on your website.
Right. So my website is douglasaburton.com. It's mostly about my fiction novel, Faraway Bird, but there is a small section for The Heroine's Labyrinth. I first came up with it several years ago So there's an old version of it that's still there that you can go through at least as a reference soon. Yeah, so this is my website. You'll see all the stuff about Faraway Bird on there. The audiobook, some of the awards that it won. But I will say, if you are curious and if you really do love historical fiction, this book won a lot of awards. And I actually used the hero's journey to start, but really I used the heroine's labyrinth to write this story. So a lot of these tropes are used in my novel. And if the more familiar you get with these archetypes and these archetypal events, you'll recognize them in the story. I even give her Sacred Fire a name in the story. I call it her Speciosa V, which is Latin for the beautiful force, which is something that in the story it comes out as stage presence. She has a stage presence that is very attractive to people. So if you like historical fiction, it's a historically accurate book. It deals with some pretty heavy stuff in there. It's NC-17, I'll say that, but it is historically accurate. And I also make a major effort to reconcile her historical personality from her salacious past to the stuff of empresses, because she's pretty amazing.
All right. Well, I think this is going to be a hit. So this
Awesome.
conversation gets a lot more traction, and I have a feeling that they are. I have a feeling that they are, and that this will be a major force in, well, storytelling and the Geekverse. Thank you so much, Doug, for coming in.
Well,
I really appreciate it.
Oh, well, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. This has meant a lot to me, and I appreciate getting to know you and Brianna, and now a lot of the members of the chat. It's awesome. You start to get used to the personalities and the questions and the exploration that's taking place.
All right. So I will see everybody tomorrow morning for the morning grind, 9:30 a.m. Central, but then also 6:30 p.m. Friday is the return to Dinner and a Board Game. So I'll be cooking dinner, and then we'll be playing a solo Hero Quest game. So Friday at 6:30, a little bit earlier than we generally start, but I got a whole game to play, so we will do that. So, all right, everybody, have a wonderful evening. I will see everybody later. Enjoyed it.
Good night, everybody.